I welcome you to our position series, Healing Architecture. Today, we hear the lecture, Material, Color, Concept, Space, Architecture from Jason Danziger. A very warm welcome, Jason, to our speak. We talked a little bit about before, and we are very much convinced that good architecture cares for the need of all the users. I think architecture is a decisive environmental factor that controls the experience and behavior of all the people. I would like to welcome my colleague, Alexandra Abel, who after her introduction will introduce the other participants of our discussions.
Thank you so much, Axel. Today's focus lies on architecture in the context of mental health. Mental disorders cause a lot of suffering and unhappiness. According to some studies, statistically more suffering and unhappiness than physical disorders. See therefore, e.g. Chapter 5 of the World Happiness Report 2017. And many people suffer from mental disorders. It is, for example, assumed that 20% of us will have depression at some point of our life. Schizophrenia is less common. It is mostly treated with medication, but these often have strong side effects. The soteria concept follows another direction, tries to avoid too much medication, supports the patient through good architecture and powerful social relations, healing environments. The surrounding, the setting is important in this concept. Architecture, design can therefore be part of the therapy itself. I would like to introduce today's guest expert, Dr. Nadine Claso from Universalraum, founder of the Institute of Evidence-Based Design in the context of architecture and human health. She was an important part of our research and preparation, and I'm happy that she is here with us today. A warm welcome to her. And now I hand over to Victoria for the introduction of Jason Danziger.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Grossart, one of the 3 students from Bauhaus University here today, moderating this evening's topic to you, which is a conversion of a psychiatric treatment unit in Berlin. And I would like to welcome and shortly introduce our guest, Jason Danziger, who founded Think Build in Berlin around 2000. He studied art, anthropology, urbanism, and architecture, finalizing his master's at the MIT. He then went to Athens, New York, Bauhaus Dessau, Versailles, and Berlin-Weißensee, working for different studios and several academic contexts as assistant professor and advisor. His projects comprise manufactories, residential housing, kindergartens, and also clinical surroundings. Yet, among the architecture, Think Build offers detailed furniture, light and color design, as well as a distinct conceptual clarity that can also be found in today's subject, the Soteria Berlin. So, we are curious to hear about your project, and again, a very warm welcome to Jason Danziger.
Hello, everybody. I welcome everyone who's here and who is taking their time to join this conversation. And it's very exciting to talk with everyone tonight. Thank you for the introduction, Victoria, and the rest of the group. And I won't say much more about myself, but I'll try to jump right into the project. And I think, let me see if I get this right. Should work. Is it working? Is everybody seeing the first slide? Yes? Okay. So therapeutic atmospheres in mental health care. am very interested in how perception and the body can be supported in healing processes. And one of the things that I've been working on for a few years together with a gentleman, Dr. Martin Voss, who is the head doctor of the Soteria Berlin, and I have been developing is this idea of active atmospheres or therapeutic atmospheres. And this is a little bit, I'll try to share a little bit some of our toolbox and talk about the Soteria as a kind of a case study. So schizophrenia is something that is unfortunately rather common throughout the world. It's, you mentioned that before, but it's something that happens in something like 1% of all people. And it happens in every culture, in every location. But there are some things that happen. It's generally with younger people, younger patients, which I'll speak about in a moment. And it's kind of an issue often of perception. And commonly people think about it that it's this idea of doubling of identity, which is not really the problem. It's more the idea that you cannot trust your own perceptions. And so it's very interesting to think about perceptions and space and how we can create environments that support persons who might have an alternate perception going. And so that's the prologue. Now I'll talk a little bit about the project, Soteria Berlin. So the Soteria Berlin is a group living environment. It's in the middle of Berlin. So that's Berlin, and it's in a very highly urban environment in a historic building. It's in St. Hedwig's Krankenhaus, which is a Außenstelle. So it's a part of the Charité Berlin, off campus, off the Charité campus. And this is kind of the middle. Can you see my mouse here? Does that work? Yeah? Okay. So it's basically this little building, and you can see right away from the image, it's a very dense environment. It's a ward, it's on the zweite OG, so it's the third American floor of this little building. So it's really like packed in, and it's quite a small project in the end. But the buildings are very interesting, and they have a lot of characteristics that we could use. I won't read what it says on the screen there, but it was built around the 1850s. The program and the requirements were to build a Soteria. It's a specialized treatment ward for first episode patients who are often in acute psychosis. Schizophrenia tends to hit persons who are between 18 and 35 years old, so it's relatively young persons. It's an open ward. It has no restraints and no admission against patient's will. So that's a very specific sort of subset of mental health. And I'm sure that Dr. Klause can tell us a little bit about that as well. But there are other issues that come up even on an open ward that are very special. It's a small unit, it's for 12 beds. And the implementation of the Soteria paradigm within a psychiatric hospital, within a larger hospital, is rather rare. Generally, the Soterias which exist till now have been, in the most part, sort of somewhere outside of a hospital or a suburban or even more countryside environment, in a villa or something. So this is what is Soteria and how does it work? I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about that. So Soteria comes from the Greek. It means rescue or cure. It's a milieu therapeutic approach, which is designed to treat acute schizophrenia. And it was first established in the early 70s in the US by Dr. Lauren Mosier. This is a photo of the first Soteria, which is in San Francisco around 1975. And it was kind of this idea of a group living environment. So the milieu is this idea of the space and the people. So there's a social element, which is very important. And the space needs to support the social elements. So that's something I'll come back to. It's this idea of sociopetal, things that support group or community environments. Dr. Moser said, the worst place to be when you suffer from a mental illness is a psychiatric ward. So that's a pretty heavy sort of a statement when you're an architect and you're given the job to create a psychiatric ward where no one actually wants a psychiatric ward. So, but we took it to heart, and I started reading, and that was also something interesting in the lecture last week. I really respected Thomas Bock said that they were working for 5 years before they actually started the project. And I have also this feeling that this is the kind of project that sort of came into me and has stayed with me, which I'll also talk about. But there was a very long kind of lead time into the project. And though it was a rather small project, the learning process has continued, which I think is very interesting. Milieu Therapy is this idea of a therapeutic environment seen from a psychiatric standpoint. I'm not a psychiatrist, but seen from a psychiatric standpoint, that's very much about this idea of the people and the relationships between the individuals. So atmosphere in psychiatry refers, I think, more to the feeling that you might have between two people rather than what architects or designers would think about atmosphere, which comes immediately to color and light and other issues that we're talking about. So the milieu is sort of interesting because it overlaps these things and it brings kind of complexity into them. From a social psychiatry standpoint, it has to do with encouraging interaction between patients and staff, which is what I was saying, sociopatal, supporting these interactions. Focus on everyday activities, normalizing this alternative perception that they might have. And it's based on the recovery approach in psychiatry. And the recovery approach in psychiatry is very interesting. It sort of accepts things that have happened and tries to find a way to move on. And I find that very interesting as well. And the balance between stimulus, protection, and activation is also important because it gives this idea of a design cue. You want to have some spaces that are more boosting and other spaces that are more calming. Reinvigorating the institutional space. So the Soteria was built in this existing building, and it's been a hospital for quite some time, and it has a very strong character, and institutions tend to create more institutional spaces. And so we needed to find a way to balance the needs of the institution, which has to do a lot with safety, but also the needs of the individual patients and the desire of the therapeutic staff to create something new based on the Soteria. So it was a kind of a how to bring all these different issues together and balance them. This is the Soteria Berlin. But don't worry, this is before I started my work. It's not after the project. And, but you can see there's some interesting characteristics of this space. Very, very high ceilings. You have these Spitzbogen, these kind of pointy arches, which are kind of interesting. But hospitals, have a lot of affordance for hospitals. They tell you that the space is safe. There's wheels on everything. There's these bumpers so that things don't get hurt if you bump into a corner. They have lots of storage, which is, very obvious. And this was very characteristic. This is another image, again, before the project. So now I'm going to try to share the project quickly. Does anybody want to say anything, or should I just keep rolling on? I'll keep rolling, I suppose. Yeah? Okay. Here we go.
Yes.
All right. So this is the Soteria Berlin. This is the same room, which you can see here above. These windows are in that same room, which I will now show you. And that's the windows here on the left. And I think maybe what I'll do is just kind of show the spaces quickly and then go through into a little bit the process, so I can share a little bit the toolbox of what I used to make the project. The So the project is sort of based around this space, which we call the piazza. And again, it's an open ward and no one is there against their will. So that has a very different kind of point of departure for the design. We worked very hard as well to use wood where we could, and you can see these things in it. This is the kitchen. So it's a fresh cooked kitchen, and the patients are work together with the staff to create their own meals, and they run it as a kind of an open activity. So the therapy that happens around cooking and food is an open activity that people participate in together. This is one of those Spitzbogen, which we had to recreate in there. And you can see some of the other elements. This table was made by a local Tischlermeister here in Berlin. And we were able to get some other kind of interesting elements in there. I think I'll just sort of scroll through it. We can go back to the images later. This is one of those socio-pedal spaces. It's a kind of a porch between the patient lounge and the lounge or the working room for the nursing staff. And you can see how this is working. And there's lots of sort of little tricky distributions of color and light, which I'll talk about in a few more minutes. These are one of the rooms, and we have a distribution of color, which we try to use with identity and also to change proportion, which I'll talk about. The furniture we designed in our office, and we're able to get support from the staff and the hospital to invest in this. And we also designed these lighting structures. So this is a little bit the distribution of the rooms. So there's the same elements, but slightly different according to the spaces. And the ceilings are extremely high, as you can see, which I'll talk about in a minute. This was another space, which is a kind of a lounge at the back. So that's a soteria. So it's not some of the details, it's the sum of the details. And I will try to talk about how we developed those details. And I guess I've got 10 more minutes, so I'm going to try to do it. This Ioana Palasma, that's Axel, we spoke about Palasma very briefly, but Palasma and other architects who deal with spatial perception have been very inspirational to me in all of my work, also my work creating spaces for education and spaces for children, but especially on the soteria and my other work with mental health in mental health care. I find this to be quite fascinating, this idea about the sixth sense. I don't think I'll read the quote. I think everybody can read it because I'm talking so long. But I think the idea here is that we do somehow have the ability to sense atmosphere, not in the social science sense, but atmosphere in the phenomenal, physical, architectural designer sense. You can feel weight above you. And so aside from Palasma, I'm also very influenced by artists such as Richard Serra or others who really work with materials and physicality, which is why I found it so important to bring wood and why we really fought hard to get wood into the project in different forms. So now I'm going to open up the toolbox and tell you a little bit what happened behind. Does anybody want to say something? Are there any questions from anybody, or should I just keep rolling on?
We have many questions, but you just, I think you just should go on that we then asking you afterwards.
Okay, I'm going to keep rolling. Here we go. Yeah. So now it's like a little bit about the toolbox and how I worked together with Dr. Voss and his team to create the soteria. I think what's interesting about process is sometimes the things that you find in the middle are very interesting, you know? So I'll talk about archetype and phenomenon. You know, when you see this image, you know right away what's going to happen afterwards. You know, it's gonna come together. And I think that's part of the idea that we should always be talking about and sharing process as much as possible. The first archetype is that of the village, and it has to do with the idea on a mental health ward or in a hospital. So many things happen inside the corridors, and that was also spoken about by Thomas Boak in his presentation last week. He had these special niches where the nurses could sit, and I find that also really important to do things to activate these in-between spaces, the Zwischenorte. These are very important because that's really where the life happens on a ward, and it's also where life happens in a normal community. So just inspired by that idea, we tried to do things like create little niches and put this bench in, which we had to do a big negotiation with the fire safety planning, but we were able to do it. It's B1 Holz. And here you can see the basic principle is what you see is what you get. So the ward is rather small. It's just 12 beds. There are no doctors or other private offices on ward, no rooms which are exclusively for staff use. There's the open station room here. And this is kind of the front porch space, and this is the living room. And this light blue area here is kind of this idea of the piazza, kitchen dining space. And the group room is down at the end of the hallway with a sitting room and a group room there. So it's very compact. And again, this is just one half of one of these long wards in this huge hospital building, which was built in the 1850s. So archetype 2 is modes of inhabitation. I find this building to be really inspirational. It's a reconstruction of a Iron Age house, Eisenzeitliches Haus. And what I find interesting about it is it has a direct affordance. When you look at the building, you understand really where the door is right away. There's no question about it. And I think this idea about working with affordances and Affordenzcharakteristik is really helpful when you're working to create spaces for people who might be suffering from some kind of disorder on mental health, because archetypes speak more directly at a base level. And I think that I think sometimes things get forgotten, how that simplicity really can help us. So this is from Dr. Seuss, Red, Red, they call me Red, I am in bed. And it's just another idea about images that we might have inside, or things that we recognize. I mean, this is a very specific context, but we did create beds, and also Thomas spoke a lot about beds last week. And I think that's a really important issue. This is not in the Soteria, it's another room also in a hospital in Berlin, in a mental health ward. And you can see that there are so many affordances here which are not really comforting. You can see the wheels, again, the bumpers, and most uncomfortably, you can see these affordances which are about tying you down. So I think when you walk into a space and you right away see things like this, whether or not you perceive it immediately, those things are present. And as I said, it's the sum of the details. It's the sum of all the details. So since we were working on a ward, which is an open ward, and people are there, people who are in this ward are there by will, then we didn't need these kind of beds. And so it was a long discussion with the staff and with the administrators in order to remove these beds and create new ones. So in the Soteria, we were able to build these beds, and these are just simple beds which are comfortable to sit on, comfortable to move, and look like a bed and say, I am a bed. So it's again about this idea of archetypes. And we were also thinking a lot about sort of echoing some of the forms that we found in the building, in the furniture, to try to unify things. This lighting structure was necessary because we had to leave the existing lighting wards. It's a somatic ward. It was a somatic ward for well over 100 years. And so we had to leave all of these tubes and pipes and stuff inside the wall, but we were able to hide them and create this sort of light shelf issue. There was also another issue that was spoken about last week, which is when patients have people coming to visit, that there should be a location for them to stay in an uncomplicated manner. We didn't have the same budget issues and couldn't create new rooms, but we did create a couple of these beds where you can just lift off one bed and have two beds. So if a patient comes and has a family member or friend who wants to stay with them for a few nights, that's well easy. Then this is the Feuerstelle back to the Eisenzeithaus. And this is how it works in the Soteria. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about color. I've only got 3 more minutes, but I'll try to go fast through it. So color and light are obviously highly related, and I don't think I need to tell this crowd about that so much, but I can just say a little bit about how I work with it. Phenomenon, orientation, and spatial proportion. That's how we used color in this project. Light is understood really as a material. We know it hits, the photons reflect. When you apply a surface color, it takes color with it. This is a very simple phenomenon. And what's kind of interesting about it is if you do it right, you can create sort of a green chicken. And the green chicken is not a psychosis. It's what I would call a democratic phenomenon. No matter what your state, you can all experience it. And so we tried to work a lot with reflected color in order to help unify the experiences of those who might be in alternate psychic states and those who are working there. I'm not the first person to work with reflected light. This is just another inspiration image for fun. And this is how we worked with it. So we had niches. This was an existing fire ceiling, and we used light that shot up and down in order to create this light kind of halo. And here, so there are many locations where you find this. And this is also very interesting, especially when it's brought in association with natural light from outside, because it changes throughout the day or throughout the year or both. And that's kind of an interesting thing for a person who's just sitting in one room. The light may change slowly over time, and that's activating. So orientation, color distribution. I was very inspired by Hinnerk Sherpa's work from the Wandmalerei Werkstatt from the Bauhaus. And I don't know if everybody here is familiar with the plans, but maybe I can skip a little bit faster. This idea of unfolding the plan is kind of exciting for us because it gave us the opportunity to apply smaller zones of color throughout. We did an experiment while we were designing the ward on spatial proportion, tried to find a way to address the body. If we did kind of a traditional color coding lower, we thought it was a little bit too much, kind of standard. We tried it a little higher, maybe a little bit too much color, only on the floor and ceiling could push you down. All of these things change your perception of the space. This is kind of activating, but might be a little bit too much. This may be just a little bit too little. Again, closer, but not quite. And then we came up with this idea of just doing one wall in color and then doing another thing. And the relationship between built-in elements and the color was kind of our thing. This was just an internal experiment we did together with the staff. So this is one of our color plans. And you can see the relationship between the existing things like the doors, which gives some sort of perception. And then we had colors. We also used another color on the ceiling. And that was because we had this well over 4 meter high rooms, and the rooms were only well over 4 meters and well under 4 meters wide. And so we really had to find a way to bring the ceiling down. And we didn't have the money to put hanging ceilings, especially because the windows are so high there. So color was really the only way we could try to change the proportion. So this is the Fahrplan of the Soteria Berlin. And I've just got one more little thing, incompleteness. So incompleteness is also really exciting. And I think that hopefully will fit because we're trying to create a dialogue. This is a painting by Paul Cézanne, and he painted this same mountain for years and years and years. And this is one of the paintings he did towards the end of his career. And it's incredible how little he left and how much we fill in the rest. And I tried also to work with incompleteness. This was just, we ripped the wallpaper off and that was there and we left it. And so this idea of letting things breathe and showing that the process can go on. So the next step, I'll talk, this is Dr. Voss, who is my partner on the project. And he and I have also started a consultancy called Zeitraum based on this work together. And I think that's it. Thank you. And yeah, I'm all done now. So I will do stop and ready for questions. I apologize for being 2 minutes too long.
Thank you very much, Jason, for your very exciting lecture, actually. I understood from your presentation that your architecture is more of the sum, as the sum of its parts. I think there's something new in the end. If you look at the Soteria, I feel something, I perceive something which is new, which is not the parts, not in the parts, it's the atmosphere, actually. You changed and created atmospheres. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about this feeling, this perception. Did you work actually with creating atmospheres within the building?
Well, I mean, we certainly tried to do so.
Or was it surprising in the end what you created when you just look at your work?
Well, it's always really surprising when you build something. You think you know what it's going to look like, and then it comes together. I mean, a lot of the interesting thing comes again through a dialogue. I think there's a lot of complexity when you build in existing buildings. It's a very different exercise, I think, for an architect or a designer to work with existing structures. And I think it's increasingly important to do so, given the state of the world. And I think that we need to be very careful about the resources we're using generally. But the building a new building is another exercise, because you can create entrance narrative, you can do all kinds of other things. And when you're just working with a small space in a 150-year-old building, you have to really look at details. That's the ability. But hopefully we did make an active atmosphere. So
thank you, Jason. There are more questions. Nadine has asked something, and I would like to give it to her, the word to her.
Ja, ich möchte mich erstmal bedanken, Jason. Ich bin ganz inspiriert von diesem wunderschönen Vortrag und diesem, ich möchte sagen, poetischen Entwurfsansatz. Es ist mir ein Anliegen zu sagen, dass ich glaube, dass wir viel mehr von solcher Architektur brauchen. Denn diese Idee, dass das psychiatrische Krankenhaus der schlechteste Ort ist, um gesund zu werden, wenn man eine psychiatrische Erkrankung hat, das deckt sich sehr mit meinem persönlichen Gefühl. Wir sind ja sehr viel in psychiatrischen Kliniken unterwegs und wir versuchen da viel zu verbessern, und trotzdem habe ich oft das Gefühl, dass wir im falschen System arbeiten, und deshalb finde ich diese Idee ja ganz zauberhaft, und ich glaube, einmal dieses intuitive Nutzen der Räumlichkeit, dass man das ermöglicht, und auch einfach ein ästhetisches Umfeld zu machen, das ist davon profitieren die Patienten ganz, ganz sicher. Meine Frage geht in Richtung Suizidprävention natürlich. Schizophrene Patienten, die gehören ja durchaus zu einer Risikogruppe. Junge schizophrene Männer sogar zu einer Hochrisikogruppe. Wie war das bei diesem Projekt? Wurde das diskutiert? Es sah jetzt auf den Bildern nicht so aus, als ob es im Fokus stand. Also habt ihr vielleicht sogar das eruiert? Gibt es einen Einfluss der Architektur auf das suizidale Geschehen, auf die Befindlichkeiten in dem Zusammenhang? Oder konntet ihr darauf irgendwie reagieren? Das würde mich interessieren.
Yeah. Is it okay if I reply in English?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, how did we address the very important issue about suicide prevention and specifically about groups who are at high risk, especially in the acute psychosis when they first arrive? I think that's your question. There is a luxury situation here for a hospital because there's an admissions process before patients come on this ward. So it's a small ward. It's one of many wards in the Charité and one of many wards even in this Außenstelle of the St. Hedwigs Krankenhaus. So there's a kind of a filtering that happens when patients come on the ward. In the case that there are acutely sick patients who are at risk or who are determined to be at risk, there's a very specific process that is dealt with by the staff there. Dr. Voss is obviously much better qualified to explain this, but I can tell what I've understood over my many conversations with him about this. First, the Soteria model takes patients who are in this state and they do one-to-one treatment. So they've organized the structure of the hospital such that they have staff who are able to do shifts, nursing staffs or Therapeuten on a one-to-one basis for many hours with a specific patient. So they don't leave people who are at risk and who they aren't feeling comfortable with leaving alone. They don't leave them alone, number one. Number two, they also have a room. I didn't show so much the photos of it, but there is one room, which is what they call the Weiches Zimmer. And this room has reduced Reizen. So it has even less stuff in it. Those photos are, they're more architectural photos, admittedly, but there are, if you were to look at the ward 5-6 years later after it's built, it looks more or less the same. I think there's this idea of Wertschätzung. That's another kind of point, but the Weiches Zimmer, sometimes they would take the bed out, just put the mattress on the floor, bring a carpet in. They do it because they have a one-to-one basis and they have long shifts, sometimes 8 hours. They can also change the room, and because there's so little stuff in there, they can work with it. But it's again, it's a renovation of an existing building, so they had to use those windows, and they put Antibruch folie on the glass, and they cover. There's a heater there, but since it does take some time, as I've understood, to actually follow through on suicide violence. So as long as people aren't alone, I've understood that's a very large risk reduction. And then spatially, we work very minimally there. So the Weiches Zimmer is basically the answer physically. And in terms of the staffing, they use organisatorisches Prinzip. I guess that's the quick answer. Okay. But, oh, and thank you for saying nice things about the project overall. I'm very appreciative. Yes. Okay, next.
Thank you so much. I think Michael is the next.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect, but you can't see me probably right now. But yeah, you were talking already about this Weiches Zimmer, soft room. And we were wondering, because in Bern, the other Soteria, they have introduced it there, I guess. And now we were wondering on the plan where your soft room is, or, but now, did I understand it correctly that you just transform another room into the soft room?
Yeah, I mean, the operative questions are really better answered by Martin or other members of the staff. But I can say, as I've understood it, we did design 2 rooms which were designated as Weiches Zimmer, and those are kind of corner room which is close to the bathroom. I could pop into the plan if you want to see which one it is, but they're very again, it's mostly, I think, about this one-to-one and this idea that there's a little bit more space, so that there's Abstand, which has become a theme for other reasons in the last year. But the idea is that there's a little bit more space, but it's a one-to-one room, and it doesn't really look very different, you know, because it has to do more with who is there, when that they kind of match a therapist to that person. And in the Soteria Bern, I think you might have seen photos of the Soteria Bern, but it's basically it has a rug and a few pillows and a mattress, and then people are there together and work it through. And the Weiches Zimmer is a theme that Martin and I are trying to work on for Folgeprojekte now. So it's still an open question, and it's a very complex and interesting one. But I'm not so prepared to talk about it that much right now, beyond sort of saying that we have the space.
Okay, so right now you're planning other institutions for this case.
Yeah. I mean, the Psychraum project is active, and Dr. Voss and I are working together. And one of the multiple themes that we're working on is also developing further the Soteria paradigm and the idea of the Weiches Zimmer. But it's a little bit kind of paradoxical to develop a bed for the Weiches Zimmer, where probably the best thing is not doing it. I think one of the interesting points of design is realizing when things are best left alone. So it seems that might be one of those points. You can sort of design, what is it called? The Schlimmbesserung or something like this. There's a really nice German word that says that sometimes.
Thank you.
But it's an open question for sure, which I haven't answered fully. I admit wholly that I don't know all the answers there.
All right, I have another question. First of all, thank you for your exciting presentation. And yeah, I've read about that in order to prepare the architectural design, you asked 30 patients and employees which design elements they consider to be important in a psychiatric ward. So can you explain to us in more detail what this collaboration between the architect and the users looked like, and what was the focus and what insights were drawn from it?
Okay, thank you for your question. So the process was interesting because there was no Soteria at St. Hedwig's Krankenhaus before we started, and so I didn't visit Bern, but I visited other Soteria in Germany, in Reichenau, and I've been also to Munich to see the Soteria they have there. And when I went to Reichenau, I basically just tried to spend some time there and watch and relax and see what was going on. And I think, so the first thing was to just kind of spend some time there and watch and try to be kind of a passive participant in the world there. That was something which was of enormous value and which I learned a lot. Then, because there was a new team coming together and new space, when Dr. Voss was building the team, he was able to put the people together, and we sat together, and he brought together an anthropologist who became what they called a Milieu Therapy. So everybody kind of came from different things. One was an anthropologist, one was an herbs specialist, like a holistic healer, another was a arts person, and everybody came together and became Milieu Therapy. And they sort of semi-officially gave me that title too, but I was trying to be the Raumtherapeut or something. I guess but I still see this, although it's some years ago now. It was I still am learning from it, from the project, and from conversations like the one we're having tonight. But specifically, the queries we did, there was some other work done by people working with Dr. Voss before the project, and I think that might be what you're referring to. There was some queries about what do people perceive on the space, and if I remember properly, I mean, this is some time ago, so that's a very specific question, some time ago, but I think there was a lot of comments that had to do with these Zwischenräume, these in-between spaces, you know, which is really important because so many conversations happen. And also Herr Boak was talking in the last week about the time that the nurses spend just walking back and forth. I think he said 15 kilometers. So that's easy to understand happening in one night. And the Soteria is rather small, but still those in-between spaces are really critical. I think they are always neglected, or they tend to be neglected, or they tend to be created around the priorities of the institution rather than the priorities of the individuals.
Dominik, das Mikro.
Sorry, thanks. Yeah, and I was also wondering about that. Yeah, how exactly did you price in this? Yes, this additional effort? Or yeah, was it additional effort? I think so.
Is that a serious question?
Yeah,
it was impossible to price. I mean, it's a catastrophe. You can't do it. But I think that you know, I was very, very passionate about the project, and I really believe that we can offer great help and support to people who really need good design. And I was quite excited by the idea of doing a project for people who are anyway thinking a lot about perception and Raumwahrnehmung. And I think that that's it's a great chance, and it's a great honor to be able to help people. And I do mostly social projects anyway. Outside my work in mental health, I do kindergartens mostly, generally speaking. So I have public clients, and so it's I guess you sort of have to take the long view sometimes as an architect. But it wasn't just the cash at the end of the project. This was not that kind of project, that's for sure. But otherwise, I wouldn't have the honor to be talking with you all tonight. So it's very good. It's working out at the end, I'd say.
Thank you, Jason. We have two interesting questions from the chat, actually. One is about the perception, actually, and the experience of the staff and the patients. Do you have some insights if there are some changes in the experience in the state of mental health, or in the even in the behavior of the patients after your transformation of the atmosphere, your transformation of space?
I'm not sure if I fully understand the question. I mean, there has been, we've gotten great feedback, Martin and I, about the project for sure. And that's been really exciting. And there are some really remarkable and excellent projects which have been happening in Germany and also internationally that follow this idea. I think there's, I mean, what the idea is a little bit difficult to kind of nail down, but I might say that one of the characteristics is balancing the institutional prerogatives with the individual prerogatives. I think that in mental health care and spaces for mental health, it's often forgotten at an administrative level that the space is so powerfully influential to the experience, not only of the patients, but also of the staff. And that over time, the staff can get really tired by being in these spaces. But if the spaces are inspirational, then the staff does better there too. And that translates to better outcomes for the patients. And, you know, so it's kind of like retraining the institution. And I think the Soteria has been a good example, but we need more like this. You know, I think that we need more internationally for sure, in Germany most definitely. But there are a lot of practitioners who are doing great work in this manner as well. So I hope I answered the question. I'm not sure if I did or I just spoke again. But.
Yeah, I think so. I think even if you talk about it in more detail, then it's interesting if the staff maybe is feeling different in the new atmosphere, or do they feel the same way? Maybe the work is easier to do, or maybe they feel more healthy or more welcome from their working place. Do you have some reactions or some
I mean, if I talk about the green chicken, you remember this idea of reflected color or color slippage. Yes. You know, which I'm not the first architect or artist or anybody to work with this issue, but what's interesting is that if you're a staff member and you're working in that space and you work there for a number of years, then you see this green chicken phenomenon changing day to day and over the year. It keeps the space changeable, so it's a kind of a live environment. You know, it's the same way that a piece of wood takes the temperature of the room around it. So you touch a piece of wood and it feels warm because it's often porig, you know, it's like there, it's alive, it's you know, and but if you use a PVC or a plastic that has a wooden texture, then it's not actually alive, and so it's kind of a little bit strange, and I think it risks becoming esoteric. So I try to avoid that, to be honest. But there, at the other side, if we don't allow our perception to be excited, then we don't. How can we offer people the opportunity to heal? It seems to be very intimately connected in my mind. So, and I think the staff, the feedback I've gotten from the staff is great. I mean, when I go visit, people seem happy to work there, and there are some people who've been working there for years now, which is really incredible to me. It's a small little ward, and that has a lot more to do with Dr. Voss and his work and the whole philosophy of the Soteria than the work that I did. But it's nice to have participated in it as a milieu therapeut, perhaps.
Thank you.
We have a question about the color white. Axel, will you?
It's always quite important question, but it's always the same question. What do you think about the color white within this context of healthcare architecture? Do you think it has an impact? The space before, the color which was before there, the dominant color, and the space afterwards. What do you think about the change of color and the impact on the people who work there or who have to be healthier in this environment?
I'm not really a big fan of white. I mean, I find I think white often has the association with an institution. Thomas Boog also spoke about that last week. But I'm much more interested in gray because I appreciate ambiguity, and I appreciate that gray can pick up, especially when you're dealing with reflected colors, gray can pick up any color and become another color. And of course, there are all kinds of grays, which is a whole other conversation. But white is just a particular gray, I would suppose, and kind of the least interesting one for me. And it's a very personal, subjective question, I would suppose. But I think that there are other ways. I'm sort of an anti-institutional architect. So I have this kind of thing going, which I'm trying to balance it. I don't know if I'll get there. And I think I feel more comfortable in gray. And anyway, I'm turning gray. So what can I do?
Yeah, it's always the same thing. If you use white as an architect, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to be responsible actually for anything. So you just use white, and nobody is asking why you use this color. So it's not even a color for many people. It's just white, actually. But you give away the most powerful tool, or one of the most powerful tools in architecture. You've seen. You created so very sophisticated and sensitive atmospheres. With combining actually the impact of light, the impact of some color somewhere, maybe even gray in some way. It's a wonderful color actually. If you don't use just a dead gray, if you just turn it a little bit with a certain color in a little bit tone of yellow or red, of green, of orange, and so on. So you have a whole world of gray tones, which are really wonderful for interiors. And I feel if I look at your work, you really did a lot of research. You really did a lot of, how can you say, you are a very empathic, actually, architect. And the people you said, the patients, they appreciate it. They do not destroy your work. They do not behave very aggressive or something like this. Can you tell us something about the behavior of the patients? Did somebody told you something about it, or did you watch even the patients?
Axel, we have two questions left. One question from Victoria and one question from me. Victoria,
then ask your questions and I stop. Okay, perfect.
I can take time later to answer that question if you want, but go ahead, shoot.
Okay, cool. I will ask that very quickly. So we talked a lot about perception, and you said your design contains only authentic materials like wood in order to enhance some kind of spatial sincerity. And so are there other architectural decisions influenced by the attempt to add that realness to the room, or did this whole process maybe raise philosophical questions for you to ponder about?
Well, there were two sort of issues that that defined the palette. One is the issue that architects generally deal with all the time, which is budget, and there was only a certain amount of resources available. And the other, in the German context for building a mental health ward in the middle of Berlin, we really had there's quite a number of regulations, not only about safety and suicide prevention and so on, but also just about antibacterial and everything. And when we came to the point of wanting to use wood on the floor in the kitchen space, I mean, first of all, to not have a wall between the kitchen and the dining room was a big conversation, So it began with the plan, and then we said, okay, we'll do a tile floor which can be washed, and then we had the anti-rutsch, also anti-slippage system for the tiles, and then the Übergang between the tile and the wood, and then that the wood is offenporig, but then we said it's oak, and oak is anyway antibacterial inside itself, and and so there was all of these many conversations, but it was in the end lots of work to make something that's more simple. Again, I think I might have shot past your question, but I mean, the idea was we weren't able to freely decide what materials, but this idea of tectonic honesty is also important in terms of materials. I think especially if you're dealing with people who, this isn't something that Martin has told me, Dr. Voss, if you're dealing with people who have disorders of their perception, if you then put them in a room where the floor looks like wood but is plastic, that is not going to help them, you know? And it's really like a simple thing, but it doesn't, you have to kind of have a conversation with the administrators and say, yes, but if I put plastic down, it only costs me 20 euros per square meter and the wood costs me 70. So why do I do that? You know, and then, so there's a whole conversation, but you have to set priorities. And we were able to convince them that it's therapeutic to have wood on the floor, which was kind of a new idea in this case.
Thank you so much. Perhaps the last question with the lecture series, we would like to give an impulse for the future. So the last question, what kind of impulse would you like to give to the discourse of healing architecture? And what do you think is the secret of good architecture in the context of health?
Oh, wow. Well, I think you've already found one of the secrets, which is, I think, dialogue. I think interdisciplinary conversation between the staff and the people who are going to work and run the ward, whether they are doing a children's oncology ward or a mental health ward or any other kind, really listening to those people. And then in terms of healing architecture, it's probably critical to find a way to balance the needs of the institution and the needs of the individual, and to find a way to address both. I think that's, in a large sense, the role of the architect, to be able to build something that isn't a fire danger, but also feels good, doesn't promote or enable or allow suicide, but still feels homely and normalized. And it's very hard to thread that needle, but you can only do it by paying attention to it and trying to address and learn everything. And that happens, as I say, through dialogue.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Do we say goodbye now to everybody?
Yeah, actually, there are still many questions, but we are at the end of our time. Thank you very much, Jason.
All right.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for all the people who are following us in the chat or in YouTube. And actually, we continue our series next week with a wonderful woman from Holland, Andrea Moen, architect. And she's doing such a sensitive architecture that you will be surprised, actually, and you will follow the line from our first lecture from Jason today to the next lectures until the end, just before Christmas, to our 7th lecture in the end. Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you very much, all of you. And we see you next week, same place, same time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.